My name is Nehemiah, and this is my story. A story of broken walls and broken hearts, of enemies who mocked and friends who doubted, of a city left in ruins and a people who had forgotten how to hope. But more than that, this is a story about what happens when one person refuses to look away from devastation, when one heart breaks for the right reasons, when one man stands in the gap between what is and what could be. Before we continue this journey together, take a moment right now to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Trust me, what you're about to hear will change how you see courage forever, and your support helps bring more untold stories like this one to light. Now, let's travel back to ancient Persia. The year is 445 BCE. The mighty Persian Empire rules the known world from India to Ethiopia. 127 provinces under the authority of one man, King Artaxerxes Longimanus. His palace at Susa is a marvel of human achievement. Soaring columns carved from precious stone, ceilings inlaid with gold, gardens that seem to defy the laws of nature itself. And there I was, walking these hallowed halls, not as a dignitary or a nobleman, but as the king's cupbearer. Understand what this meant. Each day I would taste the king's wine before he drank it. If it was poisoned, I would die so he might live. My life existed as insurance for his. The position required absolute trust, a rare commodity in royal courts where ambition and betrayal were common currencies. As a Jewish exile serving in a foreign court, my rise to this position was nothing short of extraordinary. For years I performed my duties flawlessly. I became invisible in the way that only perfect servants can, present exactly when needed and nowhere to be seen when not. I listened more than I spoke, I observed more than I was observed, and in the silence and watching, I learned how power truly functioned. But all of that changed on a crisp winter day in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign. My brother Hanani arrived from Judah with several other men. It had been years since I'd seen him, and I eagerly invited them into my quarters, hungry for news from our homeland. The reunion was brief and joyful, but I quickly sensed a heaviness in my brother's demeanor. "How are our people?" I asked. "How is Jerusalem?" The smile vanished from Hanani's face. He looked down, then met my eyes with an expression I'll never forget. Part shame, part anger, part desperation. "Those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire." I want you to understand the weight of these words. Jerusalem's walls weren't merely stone and mortar. They were safety, identity, dignity. Without walls, a city in the ancient world was not truly a city at all. It was prey waiting to be devoured. Without walls, the small community of returned exiles lived in perpetual danger from bandits, hostile neighbors, and wild animals. Without walls, the holy city, the place where heaven and earth had once met in the temple, stood as a monument not to God's glory, but to human failure. When I heard this news, something broke inside me. I sat down and wept. For days I mourned, fasted, and prayed, not the polite, composed prayers of temple ritual, but the raw, desperate prayers of a man confronting unbearable reality. "Lord God of heaven," I prayed, "the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confessed the sins of my people, including my own family's sins. I acknowledged how we had earned our suffering through generations of rebellion against God's laws. But then I reminded God of his promise that if his people returned to him, he would gather them from the farthest horizons and bring them back to the place he had chosen as a dwelling for his name. And then came the hardest prayer, the one that would change everything. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. This man being King Artaxerxes, the most powerful human being on earth, the sovereign whose armies had previously ordered a halt to Jerusalem's rebuilding, the ruler whose mood could mean life or death for those around him. You must understand, I was asking for the impossible, for a Persian king to reverse his policy, to allow a subjugated people to rebuild their fortifications, to essentially strengthen a potential point of rebellion in a strategically important province. This simply wasn't done. I was preparing to risk my privileged position, possibly my life, on the slimmest hope of royal favor. For 4 months, I carried this burden silently. Each day I performed my duties, showing nothing on my face while my heart raced with plans, fears, and desperate prayers. Each night I lay awake, imagining the broken walls of a city I barely remembered from childhood stories. Then came the day that would determine everything. I entered the king's chambers with his wine, and something changed. Perhaps the months of inner turmoil had finally broken through my carefully maintained facade. Perhaps God himself lifted the veil of my professional detachment. The king looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time, and asked, "Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart." In that moment, fear gripped me like a physical force. The text says, I was very much afraid. Understand the risk. Showing negative emotions in the king's presence could be interpreted as a personal affront, even as a sinister omen. Courtiers had been executed for less. Yet I answered, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" The king's expression revealed nothing. Then he asked the question that had haunted my prayers for 4 months. "What is it you want?" In the heartbeat of silence that followed, I prayed the shortest, most desperate prayer of my life. Then I spoke the words that would either doom me or set in motion the restoration of Jerusalem. "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it." The queen was sitting beside him. The text makes a point of mentioning this detail, suggesting her presence may have influenced what happened next. The king didn't immediately reject my proposal. Instead, he asked, "How long will your journey take? And when will you get back?" Hope sparked in my chest. This wasn't a refusal. I proposed a time and the king agreed to send me. But I wasn't finished. Having received far more than I could have reasonably expected, I pressed further. "If it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me safe passage until I arrive in Judah? And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so he will provide me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy?" These weren't small requests. I was asking for official documentation that would compel provincial officials to cooperate, something they would not do willingly. I was asking for access to the king's own forest reserves, precious resources normally reserved for royal projects. And the king granted my requests, not because of my eloquence or position, but, as the text explicitly states, because the gracious hand of my God was on me. Within days I was on the road to Jerusalem, armed with royal authorization and accompanied by army officers and cavalry. The journey would take months, crossing rivers, deserts, and mountain passes, traversing territories where the name of Jerusalem evoked only contempt. Try to imagine what I felt as I approached Jerusalem for the first time. This city had lived in my imagination since childhood, the center of our people's story, the place where God had placed his name. In exile, we had sung, "If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill." We had vowed, "May my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy." But the reality that greeted me was far from those poetic visions. The city was a shadow of its former glory. Where mighty walls had once stood, only piles of blackened stone remained. Gates that had once controlled access to the holy city now gaped open like wounds. The few inhabitants lived in perpetual insecurity, their dignity as crushed as their defenses. I said nothing about my mission at first. For 3 days I rested from the journey, observing, listening, praying. Then, under cover of darkness, I took a few men and went out to examine the walls. No one knew what I was doing or why I had come. In the silver light of the moon, I rode my mount along the circuit of what had once been Jerusalem's defenses. At the valley gate, the rubble was so thick that my animal could no longer pick its way through. I continued on foot, moving from section to section, the fountain gate, the king's pool, the eastern wall, noting damage, assessing needs, mentally cataloging the materials and manpower that would be required. What I saw would have overwhelmed most people. The devastation was complete, the task of rebuilding seemingly impossible. But where others might have seen only ruins, I saw possibility. Where others had accepted defeat, I saw the outline of what could be. The next day, I gathered the officials, priests, nobles, and potential workers. These were people accustomed to disappointment, skilled in the art of lowering expectations to avoid further heartbreak. Generations of setbacks had taught them to survive rather than thrive, to accept scraps rather than dream of feasts. "You see the trouble we are in," I told them. "Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and we will no longer be in disgrace." Then I told them about the journey, the king's unexpected favor, and most importantly, the gracious hand of my God upon me. These weren't just encouraging words. They were a declaration of war against hopelessness, an assault on the fortress of despair that had held my people captive far longer than any foreign power. Their response still moves me to this day. Let us start rebuilding. What happened next was one of history's most remarkable construction projects. Not because of its size or grandeur, but because of the circumstances under which it was accomplished. Work began immediately. I organized the people by families and guilds, assigning each group a section of the wall near their homes. This wasn't just practical logistics. It gave each family a personal stake in the project. They weren't just building a city wall. They were protecting their own children, their own futures. The text records name after name of those who built: goldsmiths, perfume makers, temple servants, rulers of half-districts, women working alongside men. Listen to the rhythm of the biblical account. Eliashib the high priest and his fellow priests went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. The men of Jericho built the adjoining section, and Zakur son of Imri built next to them. The fish gate was rebuilt by the sons of Hasenah. Merimeth son of Uriah, the son of Hakaz, repaired the next section. Beside him, Meshullam son of Berechiah, the son of Meshezabel, made repairs. And next to him, Zadok son of Baana also made repairs. And next to him, Zadok son of Baana also made repairs. This isn't just a construction record. It's a roll call of honor, preserving for all time the names of those who refused to accept that broken things must remain broken. Some worked with calloused hands accustomed to labor. Others, priests, rulers, merchants, took up tools they had never held before. The daughters of Shallum, specifically mentioned in the text, worked alongside their father. The wealthy Tekoite nobles, in a detail of magnificent pettiness, would not put their shoulders to the work. And still the wall rose. But if you know anything about trying to restore what's been broken, you know this: opposition will come. It started with mockery. Sanballat the Horonite, governor of Samaria to the north, heard what was happening and was furious. Jerusalem's restoration threatened his region's dominance. "What are those feeble Jews doing?" he sneered to his associates. "Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" Beside him, Tobiah the Ammonite added his own taunt. "What they are building, even a fox climbing up on it would break down their wall of stone." These weren't just insults. They were psychological warfare designed to pierce the fragile confidence of a people just beginning to remember their identity. My response was not to engage directly with these enemies, but to turn to God. "Hear us, our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders." And the work continued. The wall rose until it reached half its height around the entire city. The gaps were being closed. The impossible was becoming reality. This was when the opposition escalated from words to weapons. Sanballat, Tobiah, and their allies, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod, moved from mockery to conspiracy. They plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. Their plan was simple: create enough chaos and violence to justify intervention, giving them pretense to halt the work permanently. The threat was real. My people were not warriors, they were builders, craftsmen, priests, merchants. Many had never held a weapon. Work slowed as fear spread through the ranks. This was the moment that would determine everything, not just the success of our project, but the future of Jerusalem itself. Would we retreat in the face of threat, proving our enemies right about our weakness? Or would we find another way? My solution was direct. Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. From that day on, half of the men did the work, while the other half stood guard, armed with spears, shields, bows, and armor. Those who carried building materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other. Every builder wore his sword at his side. The man who sounded the trumpet stayed with me to alert us to danger. The image is powerful. Builders with swords strapped to their sides, laborers carrying loads with one hand and weapons in the other. This wasn't just a construction project anymore. It was a declaration that Jerusalem would never again be defenseless. I told the nobles, officials, and the rest of the people, the work is extensive and spread out, and we are widely separated from each other along the wall. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us. We worked from the first light of dawn until the stars came out. No one took off their clothes, even for washing. The threat was constant, the vigilance unrelenting. But external threats weren't our only challenge. In the midst of reconstruction, internal problems threatened to tear us apart from within. A cry went up from the common people against their fellow Jews. Some said, "We and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain." Others said, "We are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine." Still others said, "We have had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards. We have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery, but we are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others." The situation was dire. While rebuilding Jerusalem's physical walls, we were in danger of destroying its moral foundation. The wealthy were exploiting the poor. Families were being torn apart by debt slavery. The community we were trying to protect was fracturing from within. When I heard this, I was outraged. I called together a large meeting to confront the nobles and officials. "What you are doing is not right," I told them bluntly. "Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God to avoid the reproach of our Gentile enemies? I and my brothers and my men are also lending the people money and grain, but let us stop charging interest. Give back to them immediately their fields, vineyards, olive groves, and houses, and also the interest you are charging them." The nobles and officials made promises of restoration, and I made them take an oath before the priests to keep their word. Then, in a dramatic gesture, I shook out the folds of my garment, saying, "In this way may God shake out of their house and possessions anyone who does not keep this promise." This wasn't just administrative reform. It was spiritual renewal. The walls we were building would be meaningless if the community they protected was rotten at its core. Throughout all of this, I maintained a personal discipline that set an example for the people. As governor, I was entitled to the food allowance granted to that position. My predecessors had placed heavy burdens on the people, taking 40 shekels of silver from them along with food and wine. Their assistants had lorded it over the people. But I did not do this because of my fear of God. For 12 years as governor, I did not claim the food allotted to the governor. Instead, each day I fed 150 Jews and officials at my table, plus visitors. Yet I never demanded the governor's food allowance, because the people were already burdened enough. This wasn't just personal austerity. It was leadership that demonstrated what I valued above personal comfort or status. It showed the people that their welfare mattered more than my privileges. As the work neared completion, our enemies made a final desperate attempt to stop us. Sanballat and Geshem sent me a message. "Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono." The invitation sounded innocent, but their intentions were far from it. They were plotting to harm me. 4 times they sent the same message, and 4 times I sent back the same answer. "I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you?" Then they tried a different tactic. Sanballat sent his assistant with an open letter containing a veiled threat. "It is reported among the nations, and Geshem says it is true, that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you are building the wall. According to these reports, you are about to become their king. Now this report will get back to the king, so come, let us meet together." This was a masterful threat, implying that unless I cooperated with them, they would report to King Artaxerxes that I was planning rebellion. Such an accusation, whether true or not, could bring the full might of the Persian army down upon Jerusalem. My response was direct. "Nothing like what you are saying is happening. You are just making it up out of your head." When intimidation failed, they tried to discredit me. They hired a man named Shemaiah to entrap me. He suggested I hide in the temple to save my life, claiming that assassins were coming for me that night. But I recognized the trap. If I, as a layman, had hidden in the temple where only priests were allowed, I would have sinned against God's law and given my enemies grounds to accuse me. "Should a man like me run away?" I answered. "Or should someone like me go into the temple to save his life? I will not go." These weren't just challenges to the project. They were attacks on my character, my integrity, and my very right to lead. Each attempt sought to paint me as either a rebel against Persia or a coward who would violate sacred law to save himself. Either characterization would have destroyed my ability to lead the people. And then, against all odds, the wall was finished. 52 days after we began, what had seemed impossible became reality. The broken was made whole, the gap was closed, Jerusalem had walls again. When our enemies heard about this, they lost their self-confidence because they realized that this work had been done with the help of our God. What human opposition could not stop, God had brought to completion through the determined work of ordinary people who refused to be defined by their circumstance. The physical restoration led to spiritual renewal. Ezra the priest brought out the book of the law and read it aloud from daybreak till noon. As the people heard God's words, many wept in recognition of how far they had strayed from his commands. But I told them, "This day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn or weep. Go and enjoy choice food and sweet drinks, and send some to those who have nothing prepared. This day is holy to our Lord. Do not grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." This was an empty celebration. It was the recognition that true restoration involves not just acknowledging brokenness, but embracing the joy that comes with healing. The people celebrated the Festival of Booths, remembering God's provision during their ancestors' wilderness wanderings. They confessed their sins and the sins of their ancestors. They made commitments to live differently, to avoid intermarriage with idol-worshipping neighbors, to keep the Sabbath, and to support the temple and its ministries. In other words, the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls became the occasion for rebuilding the community's covenant relationship with God. My story doesn't end with triumphant wall building. I returned to Persia for a time, fulfilling my commitment to King Artaxerxes. But when I came back to Jerusalem years later, I found that old patterns had reasserted themselves. Tobiah, one of our chief opponents during the rebuilding, had been given a room in the temple courts. The Levites had not been given their shares, so they and the singers had returned to their fields. People were working on the Sabbath. Men had married foreign women, and their children couldn't even speak the language of Judah. Once again, I confronted these issues directly, sometimes dramatically, as when I threw Tobiah's household goods out of the temple room, or when I contended with those who had violated the Sabbath, or when I called down curses on those who had intermarried and made them take an oath in God's name. These actions might seem harsh to modern ears, but they reflect a central truth. Rebuilding is never a one-time event. The forces that led to breakdown in the first place, complacency, compromise, corruption, are always ready to reassert themselves. Maintaining what has been restored requires as much vigilance as the original rebuilding. My story ends with a simple prayer that appears repeatedly throughout my account. Remember me with favor, my God. Not remember my accomplishments, not remember how great I was. Just remember me. This wasn't a plea for fame or recognition, but the honest prayer of a man who knew that whatever good had been accomplished through him was ultimately God's work, not his own. What can we learn from this ancient account of broken walls made whole? Perhaps this, that despair is a choice, not a condition. That one person willing to step into brokenness can inspire a community to rebuild. That opposition, whether external threats or internal corruption, doesn't determine outcomes when God's purpose is at work. That leadership requires both prayer and pragmatism, both trust in divine help and practical planning. But most of all, perhaps we learn this, that walls are never just about stones and mortar. The physical structures we build or rebuild are always expressions of deeper realities, of identity, of covenant, of who we understand ourselves to be, and what we value most. The walls you face rebuilding in your own life may not be made of limestone blocks. They might be relationships fractured by betrayal, trust eroded by disappointment, hope crushed by repeated failure, faith weakened by unanswered questions. The opposition you face may not come wielding swords and spears. It might come as the voice of doubt in your own mind, as the well-meaning friend who counsels you to accept that some things stay broken, as the cultural current that pulls you towards cynicism rather than hope. But the truth remains. Breakthrough happens when someone refuses to accept that broken is permanent, when someone looks at ruins and sees foundations, when someone believes that what has been devastated can be restored, not just to functionality, but to glory. If this retelling of Nehemiah's journey resonated with you, please take a moment now to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps us continue creating these immersive historical narratives that bring ancient wisdom to life. Hit that notification bell too so you don't miss our next journey into the hidden depths of history's greatest stories. And share this with someone facing their own broken walls today. Sometimes the right story at the right moment can change everything.